Hi, friends, and welcome back to the Play Along Journal series. It's been a little bit. I took a couple weeks off after the beta run of my BB Journals course. I took a little time to play just for myself and then went on a little getaway with my husband. So we're back now going full swing at it and back playing in the Play Along Journal. So, I'm going to be exploring a little bit today with some watercolors inside the art journal and how I really enjoy using them. So, for a long time, I didn't use watercolors because I thought that they had to be used a certain way, that you had to be more pristine with them, and that's really just not my style. So, instead of letting that stop me from the creating process and using a really fun, supply, I decided that I just needed to adapt it to what my style of creating is. And so I like to use watercolors in more of a loose, abstract way. So I'm working with um, several different colors here that are all very close to each other and adding the water onto my page with the paint colors and just letting them kind of gradually blend with each other. So oftentimes in the journals that I make, I include a piece of watercolor paper. Not all the times, but a lot of time I do. And that kind of makes it a perfect excuse to actually use the watercolors on that page. But don't let that stop you from actually working in your journal with watercolors. So the right side of the page in this yellow journal is watercolor paper, but the left side isn't. So the really fun thing is that working on that same spread, your colors and the watercolor will look and react differently based on the kind of paper that you use. Over time, you'll start to learn which papers you enjoy using the watercolors on and other ones that you don't enjoy as much. So I included some scribbles, and with my black Stabilo here with a wet paintbrush, I'm just kind of flicking that pigment onto the page itself and letting it kind of do whatever it wants to do. It's a really kind of fun and easy way to do a bit of splatter effect without having to bring out other paints or make too big of a mess, but to just do that with that pigmented pencil instead. I could have done it with the woody Stabilo as well, whatever works best for you, but the key is just a damp paintbrush there. So I added that Stabilo woody onto the page on the right side. It's a little bit bolder than the Stabilo all, but in the end, they really react the same way. One is just thicker than the other. So I added that on, and I was doing it with just the dry Stabilo woody and then with a wet paintbrush, just kind of spreading that around. Now you can see I actually have that paintbrush that's wet, and I'm kind of using that Stabilo woody as a palette of color. So just taking the wet paintbrush and rubbing it directly on the tip of that pencil and having that be the way that my pigment gets on the page. So really explore around with that. I love water soluble supplies probably the most just because they're so versatile. So if you don't want to bring your watercolors out, it can be really a fun way to create almost watercolor effects, or you can dip them directly in your water cup. Lots of different options there. I wanted to add a quote onto the right side of the page. I picked one out of my stash that the sizing fits well, and I like the quote that's on it. And so having those pre-made ahead of time really allows me to keep in the flow during the creating process. You'll find over time, the more that you work in your art journal, the more that you create art, how you personally like to work. So for me, I like to batch create where I'm going to type up quotes at the same time. I can pull out my typewriter or do it on the computer or handwrite them, and I can do quite a few at the same time and kind of get into the flow as I do it versus doing a whole series of things that's just one at a time. I really like the process of being able to really get into something and find that flow after you kind of sit in that process for a while. In order for that quote to stand out on the page, I put some white gesso on the background, and now I'm adding a little bit of collage behind it. The way I'm doing the collage is just with some washi tape. It's kind of um, a cheating way to do it. I don't That's not the right word, but it's kind of easy because that washi tape already has adhesive on the back. But you can do the exact same thing with papers, and oftentimes I will then combine the washi tape with the papers when I'm doing the collage like that. I went around that quote with a black china marker, and it just sets it off from the background a little bit more. The way that I like to think about that is I'm thinking about in scrapbooking days when you had like a picture or something and you backed it with a piece of paper with a thin border around it. You could still do that, but I like to think about this as kind of an updated version or kind of a more mixed media feel. It feels more organic and messy. Other times I'll go around that with a Stabilo all and have that pigment kind of spread out with some water, or black gesso works really well. You can do several different things and kind of play around with the look that you're wanting. Those black marks had dried, but after they dried, I decided that I wanted them to be a little bit darker and pronounced. So I just went and did the exact same thing again, and I feel like it actually gives it more of a layered look, having gone and done it, dried it, and then come back. So that can be a fun technique too, to dry your page and then come back. In fact, in this teal spread here, I believe that I do that. So I add in some colors that I want to use, and I end up with quite a bit of water on my page, which is fine. You can let it dry naturally, or you can take the heat gun and dry it, which is often what I will do. If you really have a lot of water on your page or liquid, you can actually just take a paper towel and soak some of that up, or take another piece of paper and kind of soak that up. I partly like that way of doing it only because I'm not wasting any of the pigment, which may sound kind of silly, but you can take another piece of paper and kind of dip it into whatever excess liquid you have, and then you actually get really fun marks on that extra sheet of paper as well. So here I put the pigments on, I put the watercolors on, I dried them with the heat gun, and now I'm coming back in again. So really fun way to kind of see how things dry, and then coming back in with more colors on top, you get a more dimensional look to the page and to your colors. I love the look of adding pencil scribbles in with the watercolor, the abstract watercolor especially. There's just something about it that really speaks to me. The pencil strokes and the scribbles are really loose and organic, and I think that fits the vibe that I try to go for when I'm doing the abstract watercolors. I'm adding in some white gesso on the page, just kind of blending things in a little bit more, making the white on the background stand out a bit more. I'm doing this with a dry paintbrush so that I can really kind of blend things in a bit better. Overall, I want this page to stay really relatively simple. So you'll notice as you go throughout the series that my style kind of changes. And I think anytime that you commit to doing something for a longer period of time, you're going to see growth throughout the process. So the mustard journal I had done quite a ways before this teal journal. So you can just kind of tell that there's a difference in my style as I go along. In the teal journal, especially the second half, this back signature, I've gotten more comfortable with the idea of leaving the page a little bit more blank, keeping things a little bit more simplistic. And I love both spreads. I love both journals. So there really is no right or wrong. You can just play around with what you want your style to be, and just know that there's going to be growing pains along the way. Not every page is going to be your favorite page, but coming to a new style and feeling comfortable with it takes time. So with that black fine liner there, I tried to just create some marks, but it was way too liquidy and I knew it was going to take forever to dry. So with another sheet of paper, I tried to gently just soak some of that up. Instead, it created quite a big splotch there, and instead of fighting it, I decided to go with it and take the pigment that was on the paper and actually put it on the other side of the page as well. And this made it look intentional instead of an accident. So I like the way that this looks now. It almost looks like it was done with watercolor, like the teal and the blue and green are, and I'm happy overall with how this looked. I added in some little white marks on top of the black areas to give it an extra little pop. Thank you guys for watching, and I cannot wait to see you next week. Have a good one.